my name is Maja Slijepcevic, and I would like to welcome you to a new interview produced by DNBC TV. Today's guest is Mr. Stefan De Keersmaecker. I think I said it right this time. Mr. Stefan is a spokesman for the European Commission for Food Safety and Public Health. Would you please give us a few words about your organization, your duties, and your goals?
So I work for the European Commission. The European Commission is, I would say, the executive body of the European institutions. What the European Commission is doing is to propose new legislation, is to implement programs, fund projects in the different member states, bring member states together to work together, as I would say government or ministries would do in your country. So we're the executive body. And my task as a spokesperson in the area of food, health and transport is to explain to journalists, to the media who may have questions on what we're doing in these different areas, exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it, what is the steps that the Commission is doing to work towards further integration and so on. So that's in 3 words what the European Commission is doing and what I'm doing there.
How the way that you work has been changed during the pandemic? Did it affect you? It certainly did, but in which ways? What were the challenges?
You mean in my personal work here, coming to the office and this
both,
kind of work?
Both. You as the organization and you at your position.
Maybe as an organization, the pandemic, of course, we have never gone through something like that in the past. It's really the first time the European Union has been hit by such an important pandemic. So we had to immediately intervene, I would say. And what happened in the very beginning of the pandemic is that member states tended to react to this pandemic in a fairly isolated way, I would say. And it became quickly important and clear to all, I think, that it's important to coordinate the response to the pandemic. You have to avoid that what one member state is doing may neutralize what another member state is doing. And so it became very important to work together. And the Commission has taken many different initiatives in different areas, transport, free movement, health, bring member states together and trying to ensure more coherent and coordinated approach. So that has been, I think, a very important work for the organization. Of course, so funding has been made available, support has been made available to the member states. In terms of, I would say, the micro level and my day-to-day job here, one, I think, of the most important changes, and I think that applies to everybody, was the introduction of telework. It already existed, telework, but it became, of course, much more intensive as a result of the pandemic. And it was quite impressive to see how we all managed to continue our work through telework, so from our homes.
Since you said that coherence was the ultimate goal, can you please give us insights into how difficult was it to synchronize all those different responses, let's say national responses?
Listen, we're active in different areas, and in each area you have different rules in terms of competences. Some competences are purely national. In other competences, the European Union has more competences. So that's the first thing. An example in the area of health, which I'm quite familiar with, and more in particular, the purchase of vaccines. When the pandemic came, we of course all realized we need to have vaccines to get us out of this pandemic. But how do we get the vaccines? We could have followed a way where each member state would try to purchase vaccines from vaccine developers. But that would have been an extremely chaotic situation. Many member states would probably not even have gotten any vaccines if you would have followed this path. We realized very quickly that it's very important that member states and Commission together negotiate with the vaccine developers. Then we represent the whole European Union of 450 million citizens. We can negotiate good terms and conditions, and we can make sure that all member states receive vaccines. We want to avoid a situation where some member states, because they're too small or they don't have necessary funding or what, that they would find themselves without vaccines or with too expensive vaccines. Our approach, working together, negotiating together, having contracts together with the big pharma companies, ensure that all member states have vaccines and that the prices are all of how we try to bring together member states to reach the same objectives.
Since you have referred to the freedoms, let's say to the freedom of movement, and you're competent for the transportations, can you tell us what happened with the Greek's PM's invitation, or let's say proposal about vaccination passport? It was accepted, but how does it affect the basic EU freedoms?
I can, of course, not comment on proposals or ideas that are developed in different member states. What I can say, however, is that free movement really is a pillar of the European construction. Free movement of persons, free movement of goods, it's really fundamental. At the same time, we also need to be in a position that we're able to tackle the pandemic. And one of the tools that we have developed, and that has gotten the support of the member states, is this idea indeed of a digital COVID certificate. The idea of the certificate is that we facilitate, that we make it more easy for our citizens to travel, to cross borders, to have free movement within the European Union. What this certificate is doing, it's basically a document that indicates the medical situation, your medical situation. It can indicate whether you're vaccinated, it can indicate whether you have recovered from COVID, or whether you've had a negative test. And if you have that certificate, the idea is that when you use this certificate, you can easily pass from one country to another country without necessarily having to go through all these restrictive measures which are sometimes imposed, such as quarantines and tests and so on. So the idea is to facilitate, make it easier for people to exercise their free movement rights.
But what happens with people who do not want to get vaccinated, who are afraid?
You know, you can still travel, there's no problem. Free movement can still be exercised even if you are not vaccinated. But if you're not vaccinated, there's still a possibility of a test, for instance. So if you're not vaccinated because you're too young, or because you're not yet part of the group in your country that's been vaccinated, you can still have a certificate if you have yourself tested, for instance. But even if you don't have a certificate at all, even if you don't have vaccinations, nothing, well, you can still exercise your right of free movement. You can still go to other countries, but it is possible that the country you go to will then request you to take some measures, such as quarantine, for instance, or such as doing a test, for instance. So even with the to facilitate it easier, but it's not because you don't have yourself allowed to leave your country. That remains, of course, totally possible.
I was following the situation in the Balkans, and it is my area of interest, and the greater picture is crazy. There are countries that just got few vaccines. There are countries who are vaccinating citizens from other countries, like Serbia is doing by vaccinating Bosnians and Albanians. In Greece, there are indications that they want to vaccinate 90% of the population without actually hearing whether people want to get vaccinated or don't. There are many fiery dialogues and debates. Do you believe that this situation could be managed at European level? Will there be freedom of choice first, or there's going to be the right of the state to decide which are the prerequisites of the freedom of their citizens?
We've always said that it's the citizens are free to take these decisions themselves. Huh? So a citizen may decide not to want vaccination. We believe, of course, that on the basis of science, and there's lots of science, that it's important to be vaccinated. It's not just the vaccines that get us out of the pandemic, it's vaccination that gets us out of the pandemic. There's multiple studies from epidemiologists, from scientists, from the European Medicines Agency, from the ECDC, that clearly stress the importance of vaccines and vaccination to get out of this pandemic. So it is important, and we invest a lot in good information, good communication about this. This being said, the European Commission is not there to tell people what they have to do or not have to do. This is, of course, not the case. But as I said before, the certificate is something that helps people, facilitates people when they want to cross borders. But in the certificate, there's still possibilities, of course, to exercise your free movement rights. is it important to tackle this issue at the European level? I think if there's one lesson that we have learned throughout this pandemic, it's that it's incredibly important to coordinate our response, to work together. Again, if we would have the challenges of the pandemic, each from our own member state, it would have been much more chaotic, much more difficult. And I'm pretty sure that many member states would not have yet seen any vaccine. So yes, it's important to work together. At the same time, we try to show, to establish, to convince the citizens that they can have faith in the vaccines. The vaccines that are being developed, the safety and the effectiveness of these vaccines is very thoroughly assessed by the European Medicines Agency. They do these assessments in exactly the same way as for any other vaccine. So it's true that the vaccines have been developed quickly, which is a miracle in itself, but never to the detriment of the safety of the vaccine. And so the vaccines, all these vaccine candidates have been thoroughly assessed, which is very important to show to the citizens, listen, these vaccines are safe, they work. It's important that you have trust in these vaccines so that we can get out of the pandemic.
This situation has impacted many countries in many different ways. Let's say tourism is a heavy industry of some countries, and it's been kind of destroyed, and people are in a very strange, let's say, a psychological state of mind because of all this, because of the measures, lockdown, and everything. How do you expect to deal with all this? Do you believe that the consequences will be far-reaching, or?
We have seen that the pandemic has indeed had far-reaching consequences for many sectors in life. For our whole economy, we see it has been very, very difficult and very challenging. Now, again, I would say one of the advantages of facilitate people traveling so that tourism can gradually restart again, so that we can again exercise the free movement rights, whilst at the same time taking very seriously the concerns related to the pandemic. We need to be able to allow people to travel, to cross borders, without endangering all the progress that has been made in terms. And it's exactly this certificate that we believe helps us to do that, give back that important element, which is freedom of movement, whilst at the same time ensuring that progress made in terms of vaccination doesn't get lost.
One of the prerequisites of the European Union, among the other freedoms, is the freedom of speech. There were many cases where citizens were silenced in different countries, different ways. Do you believe that institutions in each country and in EU as a whole, including your body, your organization, can help people understand the real situation by delivering them the right information? Because it's a very confusing situation. For an average person, it's very hard to distinguish which informations are real and which are not. Let's say that there were different voices from different places, and this is causing the great confusion. Being in your position as a spokesman, it's a very hard job to deliver the right information, to make people feel safe and still accept the changes, because this is a life-changing experience.
First thing I would like to stress is that freedom of opinion, freedom of speech is an absolutely fundamental fundamental value. I'm sorry. Yes. It's a value and freedom indeed. It is something, the importance of this has been stressed numerous times, I think, by my colleagues, by commissioners, but it's really one of these fundamental freedoms, values, principles, which are part of the basic foundations of the European Union. So there can be no doubt about that. In terms of that, it would be very important to show to the citizens that the vaccines that are being developed are indeed safe, that it was important to build trust of the citizens. Because we sometimes heard the question, is it possible that you effectively develop a vaccine so quickly? You know, normally it can take 5 to 10 years before a vaccine is developed. And quite miraculously, we managed to have in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months, which is remarkable, thanks to many things that have been done, including investments by the European Commission in production capacities. But so there were questions from citizens, can it be effective? Is it developed so quickly? And this is why from the beginning we attached lots of importance to very clear and good information about these vaccines. The European Medicines Agency, for instance, which is an independent agency of scientists who check the effectiveness, who check the safety of these vaccines, is acting very transparently, shares with the world the assessment that has been made, all the product characteristics, so that everybody can clearly see what the product is and which procedures have been followed to assessment of these vaccines. So lots of transparency in the assessment process by the European Medicines Agency to show to the citizens, listen, this is the vaccine that we have assessed. This is our continue to follow this. We have a system which we call pharmacovigilance, which requires member states and the company to continue reporting to EMA, the European Medicines Agency, so that we can continue following up any side effects that may occur. So this is followed very closely, not just because we want the vaccine to be safe and effective, but also because we want to gain the trust of the citizens that these vaccines can be relied upon. That's very important. It's also important in this context that, yes, we are aware that there is also misinformation about the vaccines out there. Crazy stories sometimes that you hear about, very weird things with the vaccines. We are following this, of course, keeping an eye on that, and we are investing quite a lot in debunking, I would say, this misinformation by referring to scientific evidence, scientific approaches to explain to the European citizens, listen, this is what science teaches us. Because that's another very important element in the whole discussion. We want the European citizens to know and to see that our decisions are always based on scientific evidence. That's really the path that we follow. And so when we see misinformation there, we use the latest available information, evidence from the scientific world to help debunking the sometimes utterly crazy stories which are out there.
What will happen if people got vaccinated in their country of origin with vaccines that are not still approved in EU space, inside of EU borders? Any comment on that?
Yeah, you have to make a distinction here. There's on the one hand the assessment of the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine, vaccine strategy, which is about should we purchase this vaccine together as European Union or not. For the time being, in our European vaccine portfolio, we have contracts with 6 companies. These contracts allow us to produce 4.4 billion vaccines, so 4.4 billion vaccines. That's a lot, of course, but the needs are also very big. We also have to think of boosters, we have to think of variants, and we also have to think of our responsibility towards the rest of the world and to show global solidarity. But we have already a very broad portfolio with 6 vaccine developers that helps us to address the needs. That's one thing. A member state may always decide to, in addition to these 6, conclude a contract with another vaccine developer, with a Sputnik developer, or with a Chinese developer. That's always possible because these vaccines are not part of our portfolio. We are not negotiating contracts with these companies. And so it is possible that member states may conclude contracts, as some have done, may conclude contracts with these other vaccines.
With another vaccine producers.
Possible, that's possible. The other thing is, so on the one hand, yes, member states may decide to conclude contracts with other vaccine developers, that's fine. The other thing is that from the European side, we always insisted, and I already referred to it several times, to the importance of having each vaccine candidate checked by the European Medicine Agency. Again, these are the guys that check the effectiveness and the safety, and we want each of our vaccines to be assessed by the agency. We know that, for instance, Sputnik is going through a rolling review, which is a first part or first step in the assessment by the European Medicines Agency. And for us, it's important that in order for vaccine in order for us to consider taking a vaccine on board, it's important that the safety and the effectiveness of the vaccine will also be considered.
If they want to travel into EU, do they have to get vaccinated again? How many times?
No, I think there's different things here. First, a country may always, if the vaccine is not part of our portfolio,
yes,
then a country can import this vaccine, but it still needs to do what's called an emergency authorization. A country cannot just start administering vaccines. The country needs to give an authorization to put this vaccine on the market. Normally what happens with our European vaccines is that the European Medicines Agency gives its green light, we commission do an authorization, and then this vaccine can be used everywhere in Europe. But if you have another vaccine that's not part of this vaccine strategy, a country can still use it, but it will have then to do its own authorization, an emergency authorization. And that's the responsibility of the member states. That's not, and the member state can do that, but it's on its own responsibility. So countries can do that. That's one thing. Second, when you look at the certificate indicates the vaccine that has been used. It doesn't necessarily have to be one of the EU vaccines. If the vaccine is not one of the EU vaccines, it will also be indicated on the certificate. So you don't need to go run for something else. So the vaccine that you used is on the certificate. What will happen is that when you have been vaccinated by a vaccine that's not part of the EU vaccines, it will be under certificate. Then you travel, but then it's up to the member state that will receive you to see how they will treat this. Will they consider this vaccine at the same level as the EU vaccines? Or will they say, no, we prefer to submit this person still to quarantine, for instance? That is a competence that the member state have.
What is your advice to the citizens of EU and generally to the citizens of the world because of the situation in which we are now? What would you advise them?
Get vaccinated. It is so important. There is innumerable amounts of scientific evidence that show the importance of vaccination in our fight against the pandemic. It's important for yourself, it's important for the community, it's important for your family, friends, for your colleagues, it's important for your country, and it's important for the world to make sure that we all get vaccinated quickly.
Stefan, I would like to thank you for your time. Wishing you all the best in your career and future job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for watching this interview produced by DNBC TV.
watching DNBC Business Channel.